Welcome to all coaches and leaders who have joined us for this webinar. The topic, as you know, is ICF Team Coaching with Janet. Let's send our praise and unconditional love to all the beings across the globe. The world needs our praise and love now perhaps more than ever. Let the love and praise reach everyone impacted by the pandemic, directly or indirectly. Just a couple of seconds. So we had planned this webinar series to serve the coaches as well as the leaders, as coaching is one of the best leadership styles. At least the coaches here would agree with me. This virus outbreak perhaps is the biggest leadership challenge for all of us leaders and coaches. Not just the leaders in the government or the political leaders, but even the leaders in other areas of working, and also at all levels, right? Not just the top. So how all of us leaders handle this crisis would depend how quickly we come out of this. Of course, it's a big opportunity also from that perspective. Given all this, against this background, ICF team coaching as a topic perhaps is very apt for this session. And we have one of the best in business to lead the session. Janet, most of you know, don't need this introduction. She's a woman of many talents. She's a visionary, a writer, a speaker, and a talented coach who awakens a leader within and inspires the listeners to pursue the sovereign choices and live into wholeness. Now, many of my friends here know how passionate I am about Be Regal. In the case of Janet, what we associate her with is Be Sovereign. Janet, as an early adopter to creating coach-centered workplace, she has worked with global organizations and teams of leaders within to establish a generative, resilient, and high-performance culture. So she's a MCC, she's a certified mentor coach, she's an accredited supervisor, ICF past president. On a personal note, when I made this shift from just being a coach to a coach trainer, that's when I got connected with Janet back in 2014. And it's been a beautiful journey since then, both as a coach as well as a mentor. Thank you, Janet, once again to kick off this webinar series with Regal. Really look forward to a great session with you. And thank you all who have chosen to join the session this evening. Thank you. Over to you, Janet.
Thank you so much, Subhash, for the invitation and that gracious welcome. And I'm especially appreciating your choice to pause for a moment and allow people to connect. And I firmly believe in the Hindu tradition of Indira's net and this notion of us being all interconnected. Any of you in whatever your contemplative or mindfulness practice is has had the experience, I'm certain, of feeling that sense of being able to quiet the being and find yourself in alignment with all that is, however you describe that. And that means that we have the ability intentionally with our thoughts and our heart to, through the breath, connect with other people that we care about. And I know that I have been the beneficiary of people who have intentionally sent energy my way. So I want to encourage you to be in that practice and to find your own way of making a difference. If that's the only thing you do each day, is to send a message out to the world that you care, that will make a difference as we navigate this very unknown territory for our generation. Not that others haven't faced pandemics, but it's a new thing for us. And each of us staying alert and awake and present to what is happening will make a positive contribution to how we navigate through it. I think it's quite interesting that we're talking about team coaching in particular. You'll notice I use a little different language here, one to many. And I do that on purpose. I cut my teeth, if you will, on team coaching, kind of unknowingly. My classical background is in economics and worked for financial services for 15 years. And My last assignment there was in a strategy role for large scale change, and we were changing 6,000 people's lives, and nothing we had ever used before as a methodology was going to work for this. We were fundamentally saying to these 6,000 people, we know you came to this organization because you wanted a customer service role, you wanted to help people be the custodian of their own lives, and now we're going to ask you to sell. Service and sales, they kind of like oil and water. And so at that time, coaching was just beginning to distinguish itself as something different from mentoring and different from training and different from change management interventions. It was a different conversation. It was mindset. I'm just going to mute a couple mics here. Hold on a sec. There we go. And what I watched happen was something I deemed rather miraculous at the time. We had collectives of people, so hence why I call it one to many. So a practitioner, and that practitioner is working with many people at once, that were able to level the playing field around power. We had front desk receptionists sitting right next to senior vice presidents of sales, and being able to have a constructive debate about the customer experience, what it could be, how it would change from what it is, what might be the next possibility, what resource would it take to do that, what capacity was needed in the various leadership levels within a particular branch location, and so on and so on. The questions seem to go on forever. But the beauty of being in the question was that they were challenging each other's assumptions. I don't actually think we were very good team coaches at the time, but we did have enough sense to realize that when a team is well designed, well structured, well sponsored, well chartered, that then what's left to pay attention to is the social and emotional intelligence of that team, and being able to attend to that over time. So whether this collective has come together as an intact work team inside of an organization, or a project team for an initiative like I was working on. I do a lot of work in the charity and nonprofit fields, and so we have community groups that come together, highly diverse, never met each other before. The power of being able to be in genuine curiosity on behalf of the social and emotional intelligence, rather than the content and the context, will amplify and accelerate the work of that collective of people. We're going to talk today a little bit about why that's true, how that's true, what's important for you, for those of you that are coach practitioners, what's important for you to expand in your capability as a coach in the context of the competencies. And if you are here as a leader of your own team or leader of teams in organizations, the much more common scenario today, what is required of you in the way you are choosing to interact and the way you're choosing to perceive and interpret what's happening in your organization? There will be some insights here for you about how you can amplify and accelerate the work of your collectives inside the organization. Hence why I'm really talking about what is the value and the contribution of the mindset of coaching one-to-many, as well as the practices that are going to be more effective for you. All right, so with that, let's jump in. Dr. Ruth Wageman is a Harvard professor. She has studied more than teams. She's really studied group dynamics and the collective process and design thinking. There's a very wonderful intersection between design thinking and coaching, worthy of more lifetimes of research than I have time left on the planet. However, would encourage you, if you're curious about this, to dig into it. She's quite brilliant and also able to say things quite simply. So teams are complex systems. It's like an organization is a complex system, and we cannot make them great. This really is an idea that is true for one-on-one as well. You can't make a client choose to be a better leader. You can't make a client change their beliefs. What you can do is give them a safe environment, a moment when they hit the pause button on their day-to-day experience and they quiet and reflect and listen a little bit more internally to what most matters to them. What is what's the word I'm looking for? What is the substance of what most matters? And to what degree is the way they are conducting themselves, from attitude to mood to, thank you, attitude to mood to behavior to activity, decision making, what is motivating the choices that they're making? How often are they motivated on habit? Something that in the rearview mirror, when they look at their history, they say, oh, this is my strength, I'm going to use it again. Only the context into which they use it, the circumstance, the relationship into which they use it, doesn't look like it did in the past. And so it doesn't work. Most often, all of us as human beings will just do it a little harder. We'll put more effort into it. We'll say, oh, if I could just be more disciplined with it, I'll get this to turn around. And that's that energy of make something happen, as opposed to taking a little step back. You might even just try right where you are, roll your chair back an inch or two or pull it back an inch or two. You've just changed your perspective. At its most simplest, that's what we're doing in coaching. We're creating that space for a shift in perspective. That's what Ruth is saying here about assisting teams and their leaders to think about the things differently. How differently? This is the last part. Nourishing the soil. Obviously, this is a metaphor, but this is the leader's role in ensuring that the broader stakeholders in the organization understand what this team is expected to deliver, that they understand who the players are, and that they have the capability and the confidence of the leader for them to execute on behalf of the organization. And that as we think about preventing disease, again, metaphorically, when the voices of skepticism, the naysayers, the doubting Thomases, the ones, yes, I understand, Subhash, it's not in presentation mode. It's because I can't see the chat pod when I do that. So I'm just going to leave it like this, if that's okay. Thanks. They have an opportunity to, let's see, begin to be anticipatory. That there is a moment in the conversation of a senior leader with the organization, away from the team, when the questions will arise. By when will they get something done? Will it achieve the goals and objectives that we have? Is it going to be measurable? Why does it take so much time, right? There's millions of questions that stakeholders surface. But the leader's role in all of that is to keep that from turning into skepticism standing on the sideline, and rather to be available to see the work that the team is doing as it's progressing, open and transparent. Ultimately, this is how they remove obstacles. Now, that's one thing to say that's the leader's role, but what is the team's relationship with the leader and vice versa? So let's open up our thinking a little bit. We're going to talk primarily today about coaching. You see that there in red. We're going to talk about the two key components and how does a coach generate and sustain a visible and empowering field? And what is the role of the coach? It's to champion and challenge and collaborate with the members of that team. Now I'm going to say something here and come back to it in just a second. The client, when you're working one-to-many, is the field of interaction. It's not the individuals on the team, and it's not the team leader. It's the field of interaction amongst them. This is what we're paying attention to as a coach. Now, in order to be able to do that well, all of these other elements of a coaching engagement must be addressed. We don't have time today to go into all of this. This is a multi-day training and lots of practice over time. But I don't want you to think that the only thing is your coaching skill that's necessary. As you can see, there are things to build in your relationship with the sponsor, which might be the team leader, but isn't always, with the members of the team themselves. There's a contracting process, very important to think through and really to help the team think through, what are we here for? What is success? How will we recognize it? What do we think our own gaps are? How will we be able to declare when we've arrived at a milestone and ultimately at whatever the full contribution our team is expected to make? And ultimately, celebration, which is as important for the team as it is for the organization to be able to recognize that this team, this set of teams over time are producing the results we're expecting as an organization. In most companies today, more work happens through teams than it does through individuals. We form and unform and reform at a rapid pace. Most leaders find that their scope of responsibility, the objectives that they're accountable for, triple and quadruple because teams are operating to produce those results as opposed to individuals. You can't have a one-on-one with a team. It really requires rethinking leading and what is the capacity of that team leader to ensure all those teams have a nurtured soil and that we're keeping them from disease and barriers. All right. Now, my guess is there are many of you who are trained as facilitators. That's on the right side of the slide. In fact, I would say in the last 15 years, one of the most challenging pieces of working inside of organizations is that those trained as facilitators assume they're coaches already, because they do know how to ask questions and they do know how to see dynamics as they're occurring in a collective that's gathered. But there are some very important and fundamental distinctions between showing up as a coach in relationship to a group and showing up as a facilitator. Perhaps you're seeing them in some of the language here, but I want to call a few of them out in particular. A facilitator is generally more aligned with whoever the team leader is or the sponsor than they are with the members themselves. By definition, we set up a bit of a power differential, and it often causes members of a collective to have a bit of resistance to that facilitator. So we have all kinds of tools in our tool bag to help build better relationship. If you're showing up as coach, where you are more like Switzerland, if you will, then you have an opportunity to have the members of the collective and the leader negotiate with themselves. What is the relationship they want to be having and how do they want to engage with us? Everything is a much more co-created process and far more spontaneous. In this way, it's common to one-on-one coaching. It's more complex, however, because of course we're diverse, and anytime you have more than two people gathered, you have completely different worldviews operating. We can lean into our coaching capacity to be curious about another's experience, about their environment, about their cultural orientation, about the traditions and social norms of the organization that we're operating in. You can use all of that capacity as a one-on-one coach to be a learner within the organization and ultimately to be well set up to be Switzerland, if you will, so that you have permission, not just implied by being coach, but contractually, different from facilitator, you are there to ensure that this collective of people is operating socially and emotionally at the top of their game. You're not there around content as a consultant or a trainer. You are not there around context as a facilitator to try to manage full participation. The responsibility of full participation and contribution is the team members themselves. What we do as a coach is use powerful questioning and our ability to communicate directly about the pattern of interaction that we see and to bring awareness to the team of the choices they're making. Oftentimes, the big breakthroughs for teams come in those moments of conflict when there are diverse perspectives duking it out, having constructive debate, but they start to have attachment to a particular position. And it gets in the way of them being co creative. They're now playing ping pong on either side of the net. And as a coach, we can bring them to awareness that that's happening and to pause for a moment and say, how did we get here? More on that in a minute. But I want to give you the example so that you start to see the stance, the internal stance as a practitioner, working as coach versus facilitator, is in service to that collective field of interaction. And what you are seeing occurring that's not congruent with how they've agreed being together will be most effective. And this in turn is part of that contracting process of the whole relationship and of every single session. So that's a place, competency 2, that is the same between one-on-one and one and many. However, who the client is the big distinction. All right, there's another big piece here. Those of you that have studied teaming or teamwork or team chartering, maybe you're a fan of Lencioni's work on the 5 dysfunctions of a team. Maybe Building Great Teams is your favorite book, whatever your reference is for teams. We know that we have a history in systems of organizations where we first learned about command and control. And control and predictability and reliability were at a premium. It was the most important thing if you were going to get productivity in an organization. Think Henry Ford and the Model T assembly line. In the age of manufacturing, we were looking for zero variance. Those of you that are Six Sigma or Agile coaches know something about this. Unfortunately, what we started to see was that that level of hierarchy and management control was fighting with the ability to scale growth and independence and innovative thinking inside of an organization. And we started then to see, maybe it's not just the team that's in a work group. Maybe it's teams that we give assignments to and we give them a little bit more authority. So you start to have a different sense of what a traditional team is. And then we began to see emerge about 25 years ago this notion of a self-managed, today's language would be an autonomous team. And so as you look in that right-hand column, we start to see, again, what I noticed 25 years ago now, that an effective team interaction, there's a leveling of the playing field, that the hierarchy is softened. We have this phrase in America, we say, leave the epaulets at the door, that whatever your title is doesn't matter. Everybody has a perspective that's useful to contribute. And that when we have room for everybody, so this is inclusion, then you have an amplified level of power and independence happening in the interactions. And that in this case, the leader of the team is a facilitator because they hold decision making. They are the ones who authorize a team to have a certain level of power and permission to make decisions and spend money. They're also often the one who has identified who is the best person to hire on the team. After that, what can happen is that anybody on the team can become a leader of their ongoing process, that becomes a shared responsibility in any moment in time. In an autonomous team, you begin to completely let go of the hierarchy once a team is chartered. So another important distinction here is that once a team is chartered, now the team fully has responsibility to take action. Again, that collective patterning of interaction is your client. And the answer to the question is yes, a family is a team. In fact, I think whole societies and communities can operate as a team. It's really useful to be able to bring that into conscious awareness. So much of our psychological education is talking about parent-child relationship. Those of you that know transaction analysis and how do we get to adult, that's a pretty good framework for thinking about how we move from one-on-one to one-to-many, because we want adults to adults when we're working with a team or working with a family. And, you know, the families who eat together, stay together is a kind of a common colloquial phrase. And the underneath that metaphor is when we're in mutual relationship, we have a shared commitment to the health of our family system that happens through our ongoing connection and deep respect and dignity for each other. Same thing inside of an organization. We don't often use those words, although one could argue if we were a little more effective at having connection-based language, again, back to the social and emotional intelligence, we'd have a collective intelligence that would emerge more quickly. And ultimately, in decision-making, we find that there's more democracy, more consensus, which is not the same as unanimity, but that'll take me down another rabbit hole we don't have time for today. What we're really saying in consensus is everybody's point of view is acknowledged. And then we have a process by which we agree decisions will be made and they'll stick. And then ultimately that the team members are interdependent with each other. So as you can see in these 4 categories, there's an awful lot that is going on inside of this team dynamic. If you were trying to manage these 4 levels, individual by individual, you will always be behind where the team is. It's not possible. So please stop. Don't do it. Give yourself the opportunity to learn how to be present to the field of interaction and foster autonomy in the members of the team. And this is where the competencies begin to give us perhaps a view into a more sophisticated way to use the communicating effectively behaviors and skills. Our coaching presence, again, is to the field, and we're creating awareness by the members of the field that they are generating. So that's kind of an overview. I'm going to dive into that a little bit more deeply, but we're focusing on 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 of the core competencies of the ICF. And thank you very much for the questions in chat. Keep doing that. And, you know, this format is always a little challenging to know whether anybody's listening. So please feel free. I'm very comfortable watching the chat and answering questions as I go along. And so thank you. Organization culture should facilitate the team coaching. Well, that's an interesting question. The organizational culture, and I'd actually say the climate within which the team operates. Climate is the immediate, real-time, spontaneous experience, socially and emotionally, sometimes physically. These are operating all the time. You can't get away from them. So having somebody from within the system who is working with the team can be useful in that they are sensitive to what some of those norms are. It can also be extremely difficult. Think for those of you that are one-on-one coaches, think about what happens when you are familiar with the content and maybe the people that your client is talking to you about. It becomes a self-management task to keep yourself out of leading or giving guidance or providing your opinion or maybe encouraging someone, giving them a pat on the back. You're no longer coaching. You're either in a collegial conversation or worse yet, probably mentoring or consulting. So it's important to pay attention to how to keep those boundaries so that you can stay in the capacity of coach that's 100% on behalf of the other person. So I would say it depends. And decision-making in an autonomous team, is it oligarchical? Wow. I think that's a really interesting question, Nani, and I'm not sure I know how to answer that. What I would say about it is that decision making becomes an open, transparent process. The good news about that is that when somebody is not quite tracking, or they have a ladder of inference, they've just gone up and down and they're convinced that the conversation is going in the wrong direction, by having a team coach, the field can start to feel that there's somebody who's pulled away energetically. It'll start to show up in that ping pong game of people being positional back and forth. What a team coach can do is help them to create awareness that that's happened faster, because that's the only thing they're paying attention to. And as a result, they can bring the team's awareness to the fact that you've got some information in this field that's creating some friction points. Let's lean into it and understand. In my experience, I generally see the voice of doubt or frustration or disagreement usually has the seed of something very important to create for that team. And in their disagreement, they're bringing to the team a perspective that would have gotten missed while everybody else was merrily going along with the program. And there is some gold in that idea. It's something that's a little outside the comfort zone. So if we can get comfortable with conflict as the indicator that some change is wanting to happen, then what a team coach is doing is giving them an opportunity to explore that. It stops being personal, and they're back in co-creative action again. So yes, it does move away from hierarchy. The hierarchy is important to exist. It is part of systems. The question is, where does the boundary of the hierarchy stop so that the team's autonomy is able to accept full responsibility for the authority that they're granted, which, oh, by the way, is my definition of accountability. So I'm going to put that in the chat pod here for you. And I like to think about this as account-able. How do you have an account-able team? In other words, they know how to take account of their responsibilities. We want to be sure that they believe they're able, and we want them to know we see them as able to take account. And that means that we accept responsibility for authority granted. So the hierarchy grants authority. The team members accept responsibility. And that's a bit of a back and forth. You don't do it once. The environment is always changing. We must be able to respond to what's happening in front of us and not get so locked into a particular way. We want them to be able to navigate in a much more fluid capacity. Yes, inter-emotional dynamics in team coaching is a really important contribution. Great field of study. The key is to not think you can know how to diagnose, and who cares? Diagnosis is not useful, which is why in coaching, when we think about creating awareness, we are not predetermining the so what, now what side of it. We're simply saying, what is happening? What are you experiencing, client? What's actually motivating you to see the world the way you do? What's the belief? What's the assumption? What's the bias? What's the preference that might be occurring here? How congruent is it with what most matters to you? And how consciously are you making choices of the actions you want to take next? All of these things can be applied deeply to the team collective field, just as it is in one-on-one. Yes, and how do we bring the key result areas in focus of a democratic team? I will get to that in just a second. I wanted to see if I missed something else here. Yes, I think so. A team behaving as a self-managed team at certain points of time. My team at Invite Change operates as a self-managed team. I strive as a leader to have that be as close to 100% as I possibly can. Why? Because they are closer to what's going on with our customers than I am every single day. They have wisdom and insight and perspective and the greatest currency. And if I've done my job well, I've given them the authority to exercise their good judgment to make choices on behalf of our customers that match to our strategy. My job is to be sure that I'm clear about the strategy and about the outcomes that we're wanting. And as a result, there are moments in time when it's important for me to be the boss. However, If I've done my job well, that's a very small moment in time, and they feel fully authorized, full permission, and they are enthusiastically ready to accept responsibility to move forward. I think that's an interesting comment you're making about Mayor Bloomberg. Um, hmm, he did do a beautiful job in the post 9/11 time, and we need leaders that can listen really deeply and then be decisive in action. The question is, when we do it in crisis of any kind, we're all kind of heightened in our attention. We got a lot of dopamine and serotonin running because we're trying to figure out how to beat this thing. That assumes we've let the cortisol leave our brains and we can get to our executive functioning. And what about the times when we don't have crisis? How do we stay alert enough to be on the edge of what the possibilities are? I think this is the better mark of a leader that can continue to be anticipatory and aspirational, helping teams to be autonomous, be adaptive, and stay in alignment with where the organization is moving. Well, cultural and age-related perceptual diversities. Again, I'm old enough to tell you folks, the workforce when I came into it had 5 generations in it. We have always had multiple generations. I think one thing that's quite different today from when I first started is that technology has removed the lag time of geographic distribution. We are instantly connected everywhere, what I call a zero geography world. And as a result, we end up in this melting pot that requires a bit more time and attention to say, who are you? How do you operate? How do you see the world? Again, placing a higher premium on that social and emotional intelligence of, when I say tomato and you say tomato, are we still talking about something that's red and grows on a vine? Might not be. It might actually be green and it grows on the ground. Huh, interesting. Until we can get to that common vocabulary, we're going to have friction in our diversity. So, yes, there is perceptual diversity. It places a higher premium on our genuine curiosity. One of my favorite leadership writers, she's actually trained as an anthropologist, Margaret Wheatley, wrote a series of essays a couple of decades ago now called Willing to be Disturbed. I think this is what we provide to our clients, individuals and teams alike. We give them the questions that are evocative and provocative to help them get comfortable with disturbing their habits and their preferences and their assumptions, because those are the things that are rooted in the past. They're not as rooted in front windshield view. What's possible now? What might we recombine or adjust and adapt and produce new just outside our comfort zone? That's a much better solution. All right. So I'm going to pick up Bhaskhar's question here and also move us here to the team coaching defined. I think at its simplest, Bhaskar, there's not a huge difference between group coaching and team coaching. You're still working one to many. It's still important to be able to reveal, in other words, to create awareness for the collective that has gathered of who they're being together, whether who they're being together is congruent with what they've said will be effective for them, and the degree to which they are working side by side to produce results. And it doesn't matter whether the charter for those results has come from let's say local government, go figure out how to build a temporary hospital, or it's a team inside of an organization that has $1 million budget to go build a new piece of software. In either case, it's a shared purpose. Hence why I don't talk about group or team anymore. I just talk about working one to many. That collective process, it has a shared purpose when a team is well chartered. And what is the practitioner doing? They're revealing how that collective has synergy toward that shared purpose or not, the case may be. And then helping them to gain more respect and leverage of the unique strengths of each member so that you're accelerating performance, both of the team and of each individual within it. So this question about creating autonomous teams towards stretch goals. I'm hearing a little bit of an assumption underneath it, Melvin, and here's what my listening is picking up, that a team has a shared purpose, and that shared purpose gets translated into goals, and we create safe goals and we create stretch goals. Why do we do that? In some ways, it's almost setting up the team to go to the lowest common denominator. What if a team could tell the truth about its own capacity and make a declaration of what they think the finish line is and the indicators of success associated with that finish line? And that is the goal. The goal is the goal. If they beat the goal, what do they learn about themselves? So they can calibrate goal setting the next time and raise the bar for themselves because they've realized they had more capacity than the first time they set the goal. That brings the spirit of learning into the team, which is far more empowering than driving competitively to a destination that had a whole bunch of uncertainty in it when we made that declaration. So an autonomous team is more spontaneous. They're more present to actually what are they producing from their synergy and the contribution of the collective. And I think that it's so useful for a team to take time to take stock, not lots of time. I'm not suggesting that they go away and have a retreat and spend a day contemplating how they did. Rather, what a team coach can do is have them do it every time they're together. What's working here? What just happened in this debate you had? You've already arrived at a decision. It seems it happened quicker today than it did last week. And for the team to see, we've gotten more comfortable with being able to look at what's not in our conversation. A new capability. How will you apply that to the next thing you have on your agenda here? The attention is going to that continuous learning. Now, so much of Agile is focusing on failing fast. I'd encourage us as practitioners to speak about learning fast. It's not so much that what we choose as an action doesn't work and we name it a failure. It's not the only choice. We see the result. It may not be as satisfying as our imagination suggests it could be. So what would be the next option we would do? I can't choose that next option unless I'm learning. So the faster I can be at learning and having a strong capability for reflection, again, good similarity here between one-on-one and one-to-many. In this case, the reflection must incorporate the point of view of each person in the collective because we all see the world differently. That's the beauty of the human race. We have great diversity. And we must learn how to be able to listen and absorb it and figure out what the tapestry is that we're weaving together. Wonderful question about high potential members. So one of the things that I think we maybe didn't get quite right 20 years ago when we were looking at teams and team effectiveness, we would put our high performers on teams together. And pretty soon the team leader would be pulling their hair out because the folks would be at each other. They would be highly competitive. And in many ways, this notion of high potential originally was about individuals who seemed to demonstrate a cut above in capability. They seemed to always produce results. Whatever challenge we gave them, they crossed the finish line. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to work with or through other people. Working in a one-to-many context requires this. And so if we have a team of high performers, high potential members, if you will, what is the way we set them up for success? And it has a lot to do with the internal stance of each of them. Yes, bring your wisdom and your experience. Yes, be a subject matter expert from the part of the organization that you are most directly representing as a member of this team, but do that in the context of what the shared purpose of the team is. So They're not being acknowledged because they're a high potential. They're now being acknowledged because they're a member of a collective that has a shared responsibility to do something. And that's exactly right. This is the coach enabling the design of that autonomous team. And how do we do that? As you can see on the slide here, we do this through 3 key roles: being a champion, being a challenger, and being a collaborator. Now, we're not collaborating at the content level. We're collaborating at the process level. And we're challenging when the team is behaving in a way that is incongruent with what they've said would be their highest and best way of being with each other, what I call teaming agreements. And we don't have time today to go into that deeply, but I am going to have Subhash give everyone who came today a field guide that I've written on this. So you are going to get a resource to play with a little bit. And then champion, being a champion for that shared purpose, being able to create awareness about how the team is moving forward. Now, notice the principles underneath. And Bhaskar, this goes to your question a little bit. And I want to tease something out when we say leader in the team coaching. There can be a leader who is completely disconnected and separate from the team's work. There can be a leader who's inside of the team, working shoulder to shoulder. There can also be, in a more sophisticated team that's been working for a while, there can be a rotational leader capacity within the team members itself. That's a lot of fun to generate. It's not where I would start with a brand new team, but it certainly would be a possibility that I would put forward. And when might you do that? When you say establishing boundaries, what we're really talking about is, what does the team need to do within its own confines, within the dialogue that's occurring when they're gathered together? What's the high gain human capital conversation that will move this team closer to the next milestone in their shared purpose? So that when they leave being together, they're still a team, right? They're still energetically connected, but they're now working independent of each other, and the things they've agreed will move the initiative forward or move the department's goals forward, whatever it might be. So boundaries is about how do we operate autonomously from each other, and then when we come back together, what is the responsibility we have to demonstrate we've been accountable? So things like reporting, things like stakeholder management, things like sponsor relations, things like internal communication campaigns in the organization. All of these things are decisions the team makes on their own so that they all leave as good ambassadors in one voice. Back to that kind of notion of the family that eats together stays together. Same thing here inside of an organization. The teams that come together and agree on their common voice are going to sustain because everybody in the organization says, aha, I'm hearing the same thing from everybody on this team. These guys must be doing okay. Sending ducks to an eagle school. Okay, that's quite a metaphor, Jeffrey. I'm going to pick up Bhaskar's point here just a moment, and I'll come back to yours, Jeffrey. The notion of chain of command is a really important one. And back to the anatomy of coaching that we were looking at earlier, when you are contracting with the sponsor, it is super important that you're having this discussion about what authority is this sponsor granting to this team. Not, oh, of course, they're authorized to make this project happen. Not good enough. It's important to have a pretty detailed conversation about the conditions of satisfaction. You know, everything in life is a request and a promise. The sponsor of the team is making a request for the team to deliver on a shared purpose. The team is promising to do that. But if the two of them haven't clarified the by when, using what level of resources, contributing in what way to the KPIs of the organization, utilizing what people and systems and tools that are in the system of the whole organization in order to do their work, getting that level of specificity early is essential. The better you do that with the sponsor, you're setting up the sponsor to have vocabulary to set up the team well. And you start to soften that insistence that everything happens top down, right? You start to see the team itself says, I get it. I know now what the boundaries are of my decision making. Contracting, you got it. Okay. Sending ducks to an eagle school, or is it coach identifying and pushing the group's potential? I think it would be a very interesting exercise, Jeffrey, to invite a team to identify what they think being a duck is and what they think being an eagle is, rather than us seeing those as lesser or more than. What is the unique contribution of the ducks? What's the unique contribution of eagle? When is it appropriate at a stage of an initiative for someone to be an eagle or a duck? And I probably operate like an osprey when I'm working on a team. I tend to see the overview, and I have very keen insight all the way down into the water when I'm out there fishing. I am not the person to run the status quo department. In fact, they used to get really clear that after about 15 months, it was time for Janet to do something else. And I think that's why I've been an entrepreneur now since 1996. Definitely suits my being a little better. However, I can't operate without people who do like finding consistency and reliability and put systems in place to ensure that we can scale our organization. It takes all of them. So if we're focused on what is the blend in this particular community of people that best contributes to the shared purpose they have, and we're attending to each of them being able to bring their best selves to that conversation each time they're together, doesn't matter anymore who's an eagle and who's a duck. Yes. I love Tuckman's model. I think, however, that it is something that helps us only look in the rearview mirror. Yes. And ultimately, I watch teams do these 4 capacities, sometimes super fast, and sometimes they spiral through them. I don't see them always in this order. Sometimes I see teams come in thinking, oh yeah, I know everybody here, we're all good. And they start performing only to realize they never formed. Or they were a team before, they had a bit of a hiatus, they've come back together, they think they're norming. Problem is that lots have changed in each of their lives, and they all of a sudden find themselves in friction and wonder, wait, what happened here? So I think the Tuckman model is useful vocabulary for us to notice some dynamics. It's not a formula, and it's not the only lens through which to see. And I frankly think this is the power of coaching, is to let go of models and other than your own development as a practitioner, and to be with what's showing up in front of you. What is the pattern of interaction that is occurring? Now, before I leave this slide and look at this at a competency level, which is where you're going, John, I want to call attention to a few things that usually trip people up here. Yes, Bashkar, to your point about skills coaching, Ducks and Eagles School. Oftentimes what happens in teams is that we bring a team together and we put them through skill building. And while that might be fine, and most leaders are forming a team with people that they believe possess the skills and capability to do the work. It's a little different if you're bringing them a software tool they need to use, or if you're bringing them a process tool that is relevant to the audience, the customer group, if you will, that they're going to be doing some design for. And those become servants to the master, which is the interaction field amongst them. The second, of course, by definition, if we see a team as whole, resourceful, capable, and creative, it gets us out of this dialogue that we have to make something happen. And ultimately, what we're doing is pulling forth, eliciting, inducting from the team members, who are you? What is your wholeness as a collective? What are the resources here? What are the capabilities? What is the way to create enough safety? If we go to Amy Edmondson's work around psychological safety, the fearless organization, all of this is about creating an interaction field that allows people to spontaneously bring what their innate creativity is perceiving. And everyone is in acceptance of each other's ideas. That may sound a little bit like a fantasy, and yet it's possible when we build a strong fabric in that social interaction. As coaches, we can hold the bigger vision that that's where they're headed, and we're intentionally giving our attention to pay attention to it. That means we've contracted with the members of that group to receive coaching, to invite learning, to be paying attention to awareness of their interactions, what's contributing and what's taking away. Let's examine what's motivating both of those so we can repeat the things that we want and alter our belief systems and our internal motivation on the things that are less effective. Again, it's not an either or. We're always in a balancing act. In the beginning stages of a project, there may be design thinkers on the team who have a louder voice because that's their capability. And the ones who are going to ask 1,000 how questions for implementation are listening more deeply, and they're learning, and they're starting to think about, oh, well, that could go this way, well, that could go that way, without having to get it nailed down just yet, because we're in the design phase. And when we get later and it's time now to do the implementation planning, the design thinkers soften their stance on new ideas, and they start to see how fully is the process bringing to life what we had originally designed. And oh, by the way, both of them are being responsible for, has anything changed in our underlying assumptions from when we started design that would alter the way we're operating? So that's what I mean about receiving coaching, inviting learning, and seeking awareness during the interactions. Always solution focused, front windshield. And the last one is where most people trip up a little bit. Judgment is a welcome stimulus for imagination and possibility. What I mean by this is judgment is a normal human process. I know there are many suggestions that we should be non-judgmental, or we should be able to suspend our judgment. In my 60 years on the planet, I'm going to tell you it's not possible to do it. And when you do it, there's a huge energy cost to it. What is valuable is to notice when we're having a judgment, positive or negative, it doesn't matter. Judgment is judgment, where we're having an experience of something, we're beginning to interpret it, we have some valuation we're placing on it. If we can pause for a moment what our habit system wants to do as an action and replace that with a little bit more curiosity. Now we're in a conscious process of choosing on purpose and in a way that's congruent to the values and principles we want to live by. The same is true for a team. If you want them to be in imagination, we must value imagination and possibility. That means, by definition, when people bring ideas that we immediately react to and say, but that's not congruent with what we said we were going to do, if instead we can wait just a moment and let the team ask a question of itself, has something changed in the environment that makes this idea now useful for us to examine? Yes, Bhaskar, Edgar Schein's performance consulting model is unfortunately called consulting, because I would say 80% of what he came up with is exactly what I'm talking about. I am a deep student of Schein's work, and I think he understood something about how to empower a collective of people to get work done. And he really was one of the few people way ahead of his time to articulate the importance of ensuring there was safety in the interaction field, to hear everyone's point of view. And this does take time. To the question here about what's a typical team coaching intervention, there really isn't a typical one. And I've had teams that wanted something very specific. They were fairly well down the road in their work together, say a couple of years working as a team, but they could feel they were a little stale. So we contracted for something very specific for them to come current with their teaming agreements, to come current with what capabilities have been developed in this team and you're ignoring and not using it, which is making people feel resentful about spending their time on this team. So the contracting was very specific, and we did a dozen sessions. Other teams I've worked with for 3 years, and we're about every 3 or 4 months, we're revisiting the contract to say, where are you now? What have you achieved? What capability is here that you want to leverage? What's the gap that you want to bring in? How will you go about that? What do you want from me as coach? So you're going to find that contracting is quite variable. You'll have much more success if you're taking your time with the contracting and being sure, as I said earlier, that the conditions of satisfaction for the team and the sponsor are open and fully transparent and agreed to before you start working with the team directly. This is a place where some of the tools that are on the market can be very useful. I love the Team Coaching International tool that Phil Sandahl from TCI built. I happen to be fairly partial to the Tilt Team Agility Predictor that Pam Boney built. And frankly, any tool that helps a team have some vocabulary is a good thing, but always remember, tools are simply the servant. They are not the master. Melvin, I'm going to come back to that question about how much time does it entail. Again, it's a subject to contracting, but I want to give you a little bit deeper piece here on the competencies, and then I'll come back around to it. And if I forget, just ping me again. All right. Active listening, powerful questioning, and direct communication. And those of you that are looking at the new 2021 model, all of this would be listens actively, because we've built into it direct communication and powerful questioning. We also have evoking awareness, which has bits of powerful questioning and direct communication built into it. So if you're thinking new model already, think 6 and 7. And I've spoken to this a little bit, but in active listening, particularly at the more artful levels, we are paying attention to shifts in energy when the individual client is using a more powerful sense of self, and when they seem to be articulating an internal voice who recognizes a capability they haven't used before, or recognizes they've gotten caught in an old habit again. And those are examples of patterns of meaning emerging. The same is true in a team, but you're now paying attention to the collective field. And this is what's different, and why working as a team coach is much more sophisticated than one-on-one. You have to almost tune out the individual voices at the content level and pay attention to how it's impacting you, as if you were standing on the beach and this big wave comes in and washes over you, allowing all of your senses to pick up what actually is occurring. Is this team in flow, or are there points of friction? So that when the sand is going back out with the water and you feel it rubbing against your skin, that's a moment of friction. Is it useful friction? Is the team aware that they might be in a friction point? Is this constructive debate, or are they getting positional and playing ping pong here? Our ability to notice multidimensionally is the first step. And then to make that visible to the team by asking a question that says, in what way is the investigation you're speaking here right now leveraging the best of your talents here? And allow the team to think about that, to talk about that, to say, yeah, I'm noticing these two people haven't weighed in at all, and this person over here has the best information about what's going on for our customer. So it's a little bit like the sheepdog out in the pasture. It never forces the sheep to move. It kind of comes around the edges and has a little bit of a chat with the sheep, and they realize, oh, we need to get a little tighter together. That's making visible the invisible. And ultimately, what is the purpose? That shared purpose of the team. We want to bring them back into creative synergy. So the negotiate step which is my companion to direct communication, you might make an observation to the team. I'm remembering from your last time together, you made a commitment to each other that someone would call it out when you were in a ping pong game. It's not happening here in the room. What is it that would help you stay connected to that commitment to each other? And be blurting a little bit more frequently when you notice the ping pong game emerging. What am I doing? I'm trying to work myself out of a job as a team coach so that the team can up level and we all get to work at the next level going up. Learning. Remember, invites coaching, seeks learning in order to accelerate performance. Yes, I love theory, you, Bhaskar. I could count on you to find all my first loves of theory. And theory only takes us so far. It helps us perhaps to tune our own instruments in our presence and our openness to be able to receive the experience of a team. However, ultimately, it stops at the point that you're actually being with what the field is telling you. What are they communicating to each other? What is the social and emotional intelligence that's operating that they haven't declared and brought into their vocabulary? Because until that happens, they can't lean into it and build synergy. You don't get synergy because you set it as a goal. You get it because you actually start adding one another's ideas, one on top of the other, and you recognize, oh, we just created something new here. I wonder how useful that is. So synergy is visible when it occurs. It's invisible until they start to see what the building blocks are. And that's our job, is to bring that kind of awareness into the field. Whew. Okay, let's see. I want to come back to the question, how much time does it entail to deliver team coaching towards performance? I've watched some teams move to performance so quickly they surprised the heck out of themselves. They only required someone to give them the confidence that they were on track. And we're all of us as human beings pretty poor observers of ourselves. And contemplative and mindfulness practices help us to be a little better. And having some kind of a reflection practice where you're making room in your day-to-day life to think about, what was my day today? Where did I show up and it was wonderful? Where did I show up and it wasn't so wonderful? What was different? Who was I being? Asking those kinds of questions that help us to be able to claim our way of being and to be very alert and purposeful about a new way of being is the way in which a team continuously up levels its capacity. And when it up levels its capacity, it's going to have a higher probability of being able to implement well. In other words, performance results. But remember, the team lives inside of a system. So the way that they build relationships with stakeholders, the way that they build relationship with the sponsor, and how effective the sponsor is at being an ambassador on their behalf, preparing and readying the organization to be able to receive whatever it is they are producing, and ultimately getting it all the way out to the customer and closing the loop of learning. In other words, in order for a team to be generative, it's more than just the work they do when they're physically together. It's what they do independent. It's what they do in their relationships. It's what they do in their reflection time and their commitment to bringing the best performance possible. In other words, to maximize potential. And yes, multi-dimensional perceiving can include collecting feedback from others. And there are instruments, both the team agility predictor and the TCI, Team Coaching International's tool, both provide that kind of data to collect from stakeholders. I know Marshall Goldsmith's got a tool that does that as well for stakeholder management. But remember, that's someone's perception. And that's only a stimulus. The team itself needs to decide, who are we? How are we being with each other? How is the way we're being moving us forward productively to what we came together and are expected to deliver? And how do we find out for ourselves whether or not we're delivering on what we're expected to deliver in the eyes of our consumer? And the very best 360 feedback is the one they collect themselves and then keep bringing it back in. I think, Melvin, effective journaling is effective in a team, outrageously effective. And I've messed around a little bit with the rotational leader responsibility to have that leader do a reflective journal after a session and then bring that back to the team as the opening the next time that they're together as part of their learning methodology. But teams always surprise me and come up with amazing ways in which they can do this. It's less the journal, if you've got the mental model in your head about something that's in a bound booklet with paper ready to be written on, there are lots of ways for reflection to occur and some pretty cool interaction tools that are coming into being that allow for an internal forum of a team. So this is a wonderful way in which the team can speed up or accelerate its learning. Why that question about timing is so challenging. All right, so there we are. That was all the content. It does depend on team in terms of the frequency. I try not to do anything less than 3 weeks. I'm usually with them for 2 hours, and no frequently than weekly. If I'm doing weekly, it might be only an hour because that's the best rhythm for the team. I'm usually there more frequently when we're at the front end of a team in order to have them not get into bad habits, and a little more spread out with a team that's more mature. And often they're leaving those in-person sessions knowing they're not going to be together for 3 weeks. They're working much more virtually. And they have things that they want to work on in buddies or triads, so subsets of the team. Many teams, Bhaskar, are now working virtual. It has new meaning with video tools now, next best thing to being there. And guess what, coaches? You are deeply skilled to teach them how to create safety and trust in their interaction field, even in the virtual environment. Optimum team size is a lovely question. The research will tell you no more than 9. 7 is probably best. The mix of expertise is going to be a function of what is the team being brought together to do. And ultimately, if you want to build synergy amongst the team, you want diversity, but you must also make the space for them to discover who each other is and what has motivated them, what's brought them to the team in the first place. Something I call part of the team sovereignty process. Okay, I'm not going to be able to answer all of your questions today. I realize that we're at about 10 minutes to the end. I'm wondering, Subhash, what's up for you as the way to anchor what we have done today? I think your mic is open. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just checking that. I think the 360-degree view has given us a good anchor. Apart from the presentation and the recording, I've made some notes myself. A lot to reflect and mull over. With your permission, Janet, I'm going off the track. I also want to tell the group here that Janet is starting a team coaching batch in April, right?
Yep, yeah, that's right. And also in the fall. So at invitechange.com, Generative Team Coaching is the name of the program.
Yeah. Any closing comments, Janet? That's all from my side.
Yeah, this last question here about coaching a team that's dysfunctional. I'll share with you that I learned something really early on in my professional life. I made some kind of comment about, gosh, that work group over there is really being dysfunctional. And my boss said to me, that's curious. How do you define functional? Well, by golly, that kind of stopped me in my tracks. And I realized that I had a whole bunch of mental models and assumptions and biases about what functional looked like. And over time, I've learned to remove functional and dysfunctional, and instead to think about this. I call this attention of presence. So there's performance in a team, producing results, and there's sovereignty, having that sense of full authority of the relationship we want to our work. We need both of
इसलिए
them.
तेरे को फोर्स कर रहा हूँ क्योंकि तेरा प्रॉब्लम इसमें है इसलिए
We need the ability to have a bit of friction because it stimulates creativity. We want to have the success of producing results, but sometimes it's important to pause and collect ourselves and do a bit of celebrating and spend some time realizing that something new has emerged. We've become something different. So there are always moving parts here. And I don't think a team is ever purely dysfunctional. I think a system is saying to a team, things are changing. We can see that you're feeling uncomfortable. Things are getting disrupted. Let's go be learners and seek to understand what has shifted that's brought us to this moment where we seem to be in stuckness. Even the asking of the question puts us back into movement. We start to ask the question again, what is it that we want? What's brought us here? What are we expected to do now? How will we be together to accomplish that? And the team is in movement. So I'd encourage you to notice in our language, all of us do it, this kind of dualistic either or setup, and move to the both and. How do I be spontaneously appropriate to the situation and allow myself to adapt the balance of the polarity that I want to bring? Aha. Thank you all. I'm glad you found it useful and that you've enjoyed being together. I do want to tell you about one other thing that might actually be, it's a little bit late in the evening for you, but every Wednesday, I and my team do a piece on LinkedIn Live. It's just 15 minutes. It might be just the shot in the arm you're looking for. Looking at the common dilemmas of leading in organizations. And this is where we do a bit more with this tension of presence notion. This quarter, we've been working on conformity to contribution, and I just did one on teaming and how teams navigate conformity to contribution. As you know, conformity can be really good, process repeatability, speed to market. But if we get too confined in conformity, we miss the opportunity for creativity to burst something new forward. Like right now, we have a context that's requiring us to completely rethink manufacturing and the healthcare industry. Anyway, you can find those on LinkedIn, on our LinkedIn page at Invite Change. You can watch all the old ones from Q1, and we'll be moving on to 2 new ones during Q2, apathy to inspiration and resistance to risk taking. So another place to come hang out if that's useful to you. And with that, I'll say thank you for the opportunity to be here. This is a deep passion of mine, and I wish you all grand success as you begin to experiment coaching one to many.